Hey, so today I'm going to be going over a dynamic effort day that I did a while ago back in December. Finally, just getting to posting it. I mean, with regular life stuff, being dad stuff, there's a lot that gets in the way of actually making YouTube videos, but that's okay. It's all part of the game. So anyways, I'm going to be going over that dynamic effort lower day and showing you guys what I did and talking about what we just did. So first, we're starting off with the warm-up. Obviously, you should be starting off with the warm-up. That probably shouldn't just be touching a barbell and getting right to actually lifting. You should probably actually take some thought into how you can warm up better and how you can warm up to actually get a little bit more out of your workout. So I went over this Wenning warm-up protocol in a different video, in a separate video that was just detailing the warm-up. So that's going to be here again. I'm going to go and be able to go into it a little bit more detail, and then you're actually going to see the workout that follows this type of warm-up. So as I had just mentioned, this is called a Wenning warm-up protocol. It's called named that after Matt Wenning, the powerlifter that kind of developed it and popularized it, even though I would say the biggest thing is that he popularized it and that he named it after himself, taking a lot of sound warm-up principles that he learned from, different people with a lot of high-level, like Soviet sport coaches and all that stuff, and kind of developing this warm-up protocol. So what it is it's basically 2 accessory exercises or more single joint exercises designed to hit specific weak points, and then a low-level, low-skill exercise, but that is a compound exercise that closely mimics the main movement that you're going to be doing for the day. So I'm doing lying banded hamstring curls because whenever I do a lot of this protocol, I'm actually saying bye to Rick's dad right there because he was leaving for the day, so got a little bit distracted. Happens. Whenever I do this protocol for the lower body, I commonly include a knee flexion exercise to hit that lower portion of my hamstring, just to kind of, it's really not, it's a move or those are exercises that you really can't do too much of. I haven't really seen people who like, oh, your knee flexion ability is too strong, we need to do other things. So it's always great to warm up. Getting a lot of blood into the hamstrings makes your knees feel really pretty good when you're squatting. So between actually getting more strength and more volume on my hamstrings, it also warms my knees up to squat. Then you saw me go to a single leg back extension. So this is going to be 12 reps each side and allows me to work out some imbalances that I have in my glutes and again develop that hip extension ability. And then the slant board squat to develop or put myself into a little bit more knee flexion so I can get down a little bit lower and stay a little bit more upright. Even though when I actually look back at those, I feel like I was getting way lower than what I actually look like. So whatever, I guess still works. But I'm using that slant board because I'm going to be doing front squats and dynamic effort front squats today. So to kind of mimic that upright position, obviously when you're doing a front squat, you're more upright. It's going to be a lot more dependent on quad strength and upper back strength to prevent yourself from rounding over, as opposed to hip hinge or hinging at the hips as much with like a lower bar position or maybe a giant cambered bar or something like that. So that's why I'm doing the slant board squats after these 2. So this warm-up protocol, there's a couple different key physiological concepts that we can talk about that are justifications as to why we would do a warm-up protocol like this. So the warm-up or a standard Wenning warm-up like this is 4 sets of 25 of everything. And then if you're doing a single leg exercise like I'm doing with the back extensions, you just do 12 aside. Basically because if you do 4 sets of 25 for everything and your goal is to take no break other than the transition time between the exercises, then it's going to force you to use lighter weight. But it's also that lighter weight is going to let you develop your conditioning a little bit more, because this is a great way to develop GPP or general physical preparation, or kind of your work capacity, just your ability to continue to do more and more work, because my heart rate's getting up a little bit. I'm getting a little bit fatigued, right? But I want to still be able to move while under a little bit of fatigue, okay? Now, the next principle that I want to talk about is the size principle. So one of the things when we warm up, or one of the things that happens with our body, is that your body only wants to use the muscle fibers that it needs. So it kind of starts out with the slow twitch muscle fibers, which are type 1 muscle fibers that have lower force production capabilities, but have the high fatigue resistant capabilities. So kind of starts with that, but as your body realizes that it needs more and more force production capabilities, or gets closer to like those higher levels of fatigue, it's going to start going to the higher threshold motor units, or basically those motor units and the muscle fibers that can produce more power and more strength. So that's going to happen if you are either doing something very powerful or very heavy, or you're getting close to that fatigue point. So with this protocol, we're not getting all the way up to those high threshold motor units, like those type 2X muscle fibers, because this is just too minimal of an intensity. But what we are kind of doing is warming up those lower threshold motor units, possibly even getting to like those medium threshold motor units, because I'm definitely feeling a burn in, like, especially in my hamstrings and my glutes as I, get close to the end of each set here. But I'm not really worried about failing, and I'm not really actually close to that failure point, but I'm still kind of hitting those maybe medium level muscle fibers, right? And then as I continue my warm up, the next part of the warm up, you'll see how that continues to ramp up and complete as I get closer to the dynamic effort squats, which is, really the max intent of the workout today. So again, we're starting to ramp up through the size principle, getting to, again, maybe those medium threshold motor units, not getting up all the way to the higher ones because this stuff's too easy, but at least we're getting stuff moving. In addition to developing aerobic conditioning and work capacity. And then the reason why we want to actually, or we care about the size principle, is then the next concept, one thing feeds into the next, of post-activation potentiation. So once a motor unit has been fired, as long as it's not like super fatigued, it's more sensitive to fire again, and to contract for another effort afterwards, right? So that's kind of one of the concepts behind contrast training, where you have or complex training more accurately, where you do like a heavy loaded movement, like a trap bar deadlift, and then a vertical jump. So the strength required to move a heavy trap bar is going to hit those higher threshold motor units, and then those are kind of activated or sensitized to be able to contract again during that jump, right? So again, we're starting to get up to maybe some of those medium threshold motor units, a little bit. We're warming up those lower threshold motor units, getting up to a little bit higher. So now for the rest of the workout, or as I move into the next part of the workout, which is going to be like sprints and jumps and the dynamic effort training, that stuff is going to be a little bit more already ready to go. Because again, I'm not working through a lot of fatigue, and I'm not totally gassing out those nerves, not totally, fatiguing or frying out those motor units. If you are totally fatiguing those motor units, it means that you're in bad shape, because one of the ways that you actually recover through between high intensity bouts or high power output bouts is through your aerobic system, or like your general cardiovascular system. So if you can do like one, very intense bout, but then you can't repeat it and you get fatigued, that's because you have poor cardiovascular conditioning or work capacity. So you can really kind of see how those three principles explain this warm-up protocol and tie it all together. So we're starting to hit higher threshold motor units through the size principle. Those are starting to get warmed up a little bit. Then they are more activated, or they're more stimulated or sensitized towards prior contraction for the rest of the workout or the next parts of the workout. And if they aren't, it's because I'm in bad shape, and which, I'm not. This feels pretty good. This feels pretty easy to actually make through this whole protocol. But if you weren't, and you were huffing and puffing and this really gassed you out, then this will develop better GPP, which will allow you to recover better, and you're going to have repeated access to those higher threshold motor units, or those motor units that provide a little bit more power. So now we're going to continue this warm-up protocol. Again, if I was just going to lift and that was all I was going to do, I could really just go from the Wenning warm-up and go right to the barbell lifts, but I want to do some sprints and jumps before I get to that. So I'm going to still do a dynamic warm-up, kind of like you would do just for like a general field athlete. I'm doing some A-skips, I'm doing some side shuffles, and then I'm going to do some pogo hops there. So, hey, movements that you would generally don't see a powerlifter or bodybuilder do, or other sort of strength athlete, but hey, powerlifters are athletes too, but they're athletes by technicality, even though, like, we're competing. Whatever. But generally, I just think that, it's important for humans to be able to move athletically. So, you should be able to skip and jump, and as I adjust myself there, that's awkward. But you should be able to sprint and jump and do A-skips, even if I am, that's not in my sport. So I'm not really close to, or I'm coming off of a meet, I'm not really close to getting ready for another meet. So I'm going to throw in more of these, human movements, like things that people should generally be able to do, just so I'm moving in different shapes, moving in different patterns than my body is used to. I'm also getting some extensive plyometrics in, which means low-level plyometrics done for high volume. That's what the skips and jumps and pogo hops all are. Mini plyometrics done at a high volume to kind of condition my feet, my ankles and calves, and all the soft tissue there to be able to handle more intensive plyometric actions in the future and to keep them healthy when I sprint. So now that dynamic effort warm-up is done, I'm kind of on the actual workout part. So the sprints are kind of that transition period between warming up and actually working out. So now I'm feeling pretty ready to go. I had gotten, all my GPP in. I just started to hit some, general athletic shapes, and now it's time to sprint. So what I'm doing, since it's been a while since I sprinted, is I'm using the sled. I'm doing some sled resisted sprints. I have 2 plates on there, so 90 pounds, which is greatly going to reduce the speed at which I move. So, any sort of sprinting is the highest speeds, the highest forces that we can really experience in strength and conditioning. So as a powerlifter, those are not really forces or positions that I'm actually going to see. I hope I'm not sprinting on the platform. If I am, that means something has gone horribly, horribly wrong. But again, the reason why I'm doing it at all is because I think humans should be able to sprint. This is an off-season program, so it doesn't have to be specific to powerlifting. It's going to let me develop my body in different ways. It's still going to allow me to develop high rates of force development, because that's one of the things sprinting does. It's supposed to be fast. It's supposed to be quick forces. It's not like that slow grinding type of strength. So it's different. It's speed strength there. And here we go again. And again, I think it's important to be able to, it's way easier to be able to retain sprinting if I ever do want to get back into more, competitive sprinting or something like that in the future. But it's way easier to retain it than it is to get it back if you haven't been sprinting for a while. And to be generally healthy, I think you should be able to sprint. That's a really good indication if your body's in a good, healthy position. So I'm doing 3 sets of 10 yards with a minute break in between each sprint to allow myself to recover, just so I can actually have high outputs. But Again, the sled is going to slow me down, so the forces are a little bit lower than what I would normally experience just during normal sprints because the speed is a little bit slower. But it still allows my body to hit the sprinting joint positions. It allows me to hit those joint angles and everything that I, condition my body to actually be able to sprint. What I do is from program to program, I'll actually take weight off. So that is my means of progression. Where everybody talks about progressive overload and adding more weight onto the bar. Well, one of the ways to progress sprints is actually to take weight off of the sled or implement that you're actually using, because it's going to allow you to run faster. So the next thing that you're going to see me do is some fillers that I basically did in between sets of warming up for the front squat. So I just did a split squat jump there where I stuck the landing to kind of do, that's just where I put my jumping exercise for the day. And then you're going to see me do a slow and controlled hip switch to glute stretch to work on my hip internal and external rotation, mobility, and stability. So fillers can be used to kind of basically get more out of a main movement. So they're kind of mobility, stability exercises that are thrown in between sets of the main movement. What I'm doing here is I'm doing them in between sets of my, warm-up sets for the front squat, because I'm going to be doing my dynamic effort front squat every minute on the minute. So I'm not going to have time to be actually be able to do them in between sets of the front squat. So I'm doing them as kind of an extended warm-up so that I am more ready for the front squat. Again, not that I'm not ready, it's just I actually want to work on my mobility and stability as well, not just my strength and power. So those are kind of they're put into the program so I can get more out of the main variation or the main primary exercise of the day, which is this dynamic effort front squat that you're going to see me do. So I did 5 sets of 1 of the split squat jumps, and then I did 3 sets of 2 aside for the hip switch to glute stretch, and now I'm on to the dynamic effort front squats. For the dynamic effort front squats, I'm going to do 10 sets of 2 reps every minute on the minute. So this one's kind of cool, and it's fun to do. I personally really enjoy dynamic effort training. But so I'm doing 145 pounds plus 3 chains on each side, and I'm also using a tendo unit to actually measure the speed at which I'm moving. So tendo unit, you can't really see it, but I have it wrapped around the barbell just on the inside of the left J hook, kind of right where my left elbow is right now. But basically it's a pulley system attached to a computer that gives a readout of how fast that the bar is moving. So my intent throughout these weeks was to keep the meters per second above 0.8, because really that comes from the West Side protocols and what Louis Simmons used to say, that above 0.8 you can measure it as speed strength. And speed strength, it's kind of, again, a joke. Is it speed strength or strength speed? The way that I determine that is that if the intent of the exercise is to move the weight fast, then it's speed strength, as long as it is moving fast enough. It's lightly loaded, moving quickly. If the intent of the exercise is to move heavier mass, so you're heavy lifting, max effort lifting, then it is strength speed, as long as the bar is still moving. So, but that 0.8 comes from reading the West Side articles and the West Side books, that above 0.8 meters per second is speed strength, which is what I'm after on dynamic effort day. Now, since on dynamic effort, the weight is going to be lower so that you can move the bar faster, there's also a lot of benefit to putting it on some sort of clock. So I'm doing it every minute on the minute. I'm doing a set of front squats. So I'm not taking full rest in between, but that incomplete rest is actually going to allow me to push through some fatigue, especially as I get closer towards the end of the sets, and actually, force me to give some effort to maintain the speed that I actually want. If I'm just resting forever, I might lose some of that effort level of the training. That's kind of like mental focus that it takes to actually get through that sets because basically I'm just training lazy. But to actually put this dynamic effort training on a clock, it's going to force me to move faster and stay focused and stay in the zone. Now, there are a lot of benefits to dynamic effort training. For powerlifting specifically, a lot of people will make the argument that it's not worth it, it's not specific because you don't actually move the bar that fast in a powerlifting meet. You don't use that light of weights. However, there are still some benefits to it. So it's going to be great technique work because the weight is so light. If you are working on technical ability and you have a lot of reps to actually practice that technical ability, but the weight might not be a limiting factor, it's actually going to be your technical ability. Now that is going to be a little bit different because technique at light weights doesn't necessarily translate to technique at heavy weights, but that's a reason why on our max effort days we still do heavy lifts. Now, one thing that's nice too is that this is still going to let me get a lot of reps at squatting, but since the weight is lower, it's going to, some adaptation processes, it's going to let me recover a little bit more effectively from the heavy lifts that I did earlier in the week. So as an example, like a lot of things we don't think about is that your bone and like collagen actually adapts to not just your muscle, but bone, it takes a lot longer for your bone and collagen tissue, or like the connective tissue in between your joints, to adapt relative to your muscle fibers, basically because of blood flow restriction, and then bone because it's just a longer adaptation process. So when you lift super heavy, you can actually create like micro fractures in your spine and in the end plates in between the vertebrae of your spine. But that will eventually callus over if you give it proper rest, and then become a stronger structure. And then that's one of the reasons why powerlifters can continually lift heavier and heavier loads, because their spine becomes thicker and denser and has the ability to support more weight. But if you don't let that process happen, then you can eventually have spine problems and overuse injuries. So I did my like heavy lifts earlier in the week. It takes about 5 days, according to Stu McGill, for that bone adaptation to happen. You know, if I can only lift lower body once a week, that's not going to be a lot of stimulus to actually get better. But what the dynamic effort day lets you do is it lets you practice technique work, get a lot of reps, get high volume in, try really, really hard throughout a workout to try to put as much force into the bar as you can, but under light enough loads that it might not necessarily get in the way of that bony or collagenous adaptation process. So there's still a lot of benefits to it. In addition to rate of force development, again, I was working on speed strength, how quickly your muscle fibers can actually contract. That can be very, very beneficial for athletics, where like they're really all rate of force development sports. They're not really maximum strength or strength speed sports. There's definitely a couple sports that require like high like maximum strength levels anytime you have to wrestle somebody, anytime you have to move a heavy object. But even that, there's still going to be a high rate of force development requirement. So the speed strength or dynamic effort training is going to come in very handy. I mean, when we're really everybody who comes into the gym that is training for athletics, what they're after is like power development. Power is force times velocity. So one of the reasons why athletes lift and start to lift heavy weights is because they have very low force production capabilities, which is basically just a way of saying that they're weak and their muscles can't contract with high force. But power itself is your ability to display the strength that you have quickly. So once you have some level of strength underneath your belt, you want to learn how to actually display that as fast as you can. Another way of kind of putting that is you want to gain or use your high threshold motor units, which is kind of those type 2X muscle fibers that we're talking about in the warm-up a little bit and throughout the sprints. You want to be able to use those very efficiently and get up to those very quickly, which is what that's called. If you are neurologically efficient, it means you have access to those high threshold motor units very quickly. one of the things that you're kind of developing during this speed strength training is you're developing the ability to, you're practicing that neurological efficiency. You're learning how to gain access to those motor units faster. Another way this is put is like you're developing more efficient rate coding. Rate coding is the speed or how quickly the electrical signal is sent down your nerves to contract your muscles. So when you are more efficient at that, you can actually contract your muscles quicker, and you're going to be able to develop more force quickly. So I'm coming down towards the end of the dynamic effort training here, the front squats. And overall, I was doing pretty well on, this was my 3rd week, so I did pretty much know what weight to use when it came to keeping above the speed threshold that I wanted to hit. And I think there were only 2 reps towards the end that were like 0.78 and 0.76, which I still count like, hey, round up, gotta have some sort of cutoff here, but so I'll count it that I got them all. So the next thing that you're going to see me do here is some barbell RDLs. So at my last meet, I missed my last deadlift up at the top, and that pissed me off. So I'm going to try my best to make sure that that doesn't happen by definitely performing and picking supplemental movements or other movements, maybe max effort movements stuff too, that accentuate that top position and really allow me to develop that top position of the deadlift. So RDLs are going to be one of those movements. Now at this time I didn't have straps. I would definitely use straps for this if I had them, but I'm just going to go with a mixed grip here so that the bar doesn't roll out of my hand. And I'm going to do 5 reps here. I'm pretty sure this is the heaviest I had ever gone with the RDLs, mostly because it's just something that I haven't programmed a lot of. So I'm excited to see the strength gains that I'm going to get from pushing that for a while. So we'll see where that goes. I definitely want to get that north of 405, see how much that does help my lockout. 4 or 5 for 5 or 6 around would be pretty cool. So we'll see how that goes. That was my second to last set. My first set done with 365. I did 1 set with 315 and then 2 sets of 5 at 365 for that one. So the next move that you're going to see me do here is a suitcase carry, but I'm going to be doing it with the trap bar. This is just kind of a cool, a little bit different variation that we have of a suitcase walk. So I have a plate on one side of the trap bar, and then I'm going to walk back and forth with it. So when I get down to the end, I'm going to put it back down, switch sides, and walk back around, so that I'm going to start to develop the other side. And there I go. You can barely see me all the way down there. As to powerlifting, our core's main purpose is to really resist movement. So we want to maintain stiffness of our core as much as we can to allow for better force transfer into the bar. So we kind of do our strength or our core power already by our heavy lifts. So a lot of the accessory lifts that we want to do is focus on core strength endurance. So the way that I'm going to be doing this is I'm going to walk down and back 3 sets of 30 yards with a 25-pound plate on one side, but I'm not going to, basically the only breaks that I'm trying to take is just to put it down, turn around, pick it back up, and then continue to walk. So that whole time for that 3 sets, my core is going to be light braced, medium-ish. I'm not bracing like I'm going for a maximal deadlift, trying to tune the bracing level towards the demands of the movement that I'm performing, in this case the trap bar suitcase walk, which is not, maximal deadlift, not used for maximum force requirements, but I want to brace just enough to maintain the position that I'm holding. So this is going to be a good strength endurance one for my core to see how long that I can actually hold it for. I was definitely starting to get gassed out by this time. You see, really starting to not have fun anymore. Definitely also fighting through a little bit of a cold. So the past 2 weeks, I actually went a little bit heavier on this with a plate on each side, a plate on one side, but I was feeling really pretty gassed out today. So to make a little bit of do a little bit of auto regulation, I switched it up so that I was not taking any breaks between my sets, but I was doing a little bit lighter of a weight, whereas last time I was doing a little bit heavier weight but taking whatever rest that I needed to in between. So that was one way that I could still move the needle forward for the day and not just kind of phone it in and not do it, but I could still get a really decent training effect from it. And walking with heavy weight or walking with weight, doing some sort of carry exercise is really one of my favorite for core, especially for not just for strength athletes, but just for athletes in general population people, because just walking under load does so much for our back health, hip health, core strength. There's just so much to it. Get some grip strength. I was definitely getting some grip endurance on that, some upper back strength. There's just a lot that you get out of it. So it's super cool to do, and I definitely recommend doing carries in your program, almost no matter what type of athlete that you are. So the next thing that I'm going to go to is slider hamstring curls. So again, this is the third week of this. So what's happening, or how I am going to progress this, is I'm doing 100 reps. How I broke this up was that the first week I did 5 sets of 20. The next week I did 4 sets of 25. And this week I did 1 set of 40 and 2 sets of 30 to get to the 100 reps. So what I'm trying to do is increase the density of the work that I just did by doing the same amount of work, but doing it in less sets. You can kind of do that by doing a certain amount of work, but doing it in less time. I wasn't necessarily keeping track of the time here, or that it was taking me to do this, as you're going to see in a second too. My mom actually popped up, and I started having a little bit of a conversation with her in the middle of this, so that extended this out a little bit, but that's okay. It's always good to talk to your mom. Go tell your mom that you love her. I'm sure she's great. If she's not great, then I'm sorry. But so I'm talking to my mom quick. So again, that extended this rest period out, but I still got it. I got the 100 reps done in 3 sets compared to 5 sets the first week. And I was definitely feeling a really big burn in my hamstrings. Everybody's knee flexion ability, there's not really, again, I haven't seen somebody that has knee flexion ability, or the ability to bend your knee, like bring your ankle up towards your hamstring. I haven't seen that ever be really too strong in somebody. There could be other weak points, but even for people who have other weak points, they can still benefit a lot from getting that stronger. So slider hamstring curls in my level of progression are kind of like level 3 of difficulty when it comes to knee flexion exercise, when it comes to skill requirement, because you're still trying to maintain hip extension. It's a little, for some people, it's hard to actually maintain that glute bridge position, and you see me gas out a little bit here. I'm hitting some partial reps, not getting that back all the way, but I'm okay with that. So it might be tough for them to actually maintain core stiffness and that hip extension position, so that they're trying to actually maybe get their low back and glutes involved. So you want to make sure that they try to keep that braced as much as possible, so that the focal point is actually going to be your calves and your hamstrings' ability to flex the knee. The hamstring, or the slider hamstring curl, they're still going to be shortened, overloaded. is a shortened overloaded movement, which means that it's toughest when the hamstring is in the shortest position, or as that hamstring shortens by bringing that ankle closer to the hip or bending your knee. So it's not going to cause a lot of soreness unless it's something that you're not used to. I mean, the next day I wasn't really that sore at all. Hey, there's Mom. Say hi, Mom. She's definitely not going to like being on this video, but that's okay. She may not even ever know, but we're just talking and fixing problems in life. So the shortened overloaded or movements or exercises that are tough on the muscle when they're in the shortened position tend to cause a little bit less muscle damage, maybe have a slightly less hypertrophic response compared to like a lengthened overloaded movement, which is if you think about maybe like a GHR or a Nordic hamstring curl, those maybe have more hypertrophic response, but the slider hamstring curls are going to be a little bit easier to recover from. They're still have a decent, they're going to be a little bit more metabolically taxing, so it's going to tax your muscles' ability to produce energy over time, instead of necessarily handled that lengthened position and be under heavy muscle tension. So it's a different hypertrophic stimulus, and that might be also something that's very beneficial to somebody if you are just starting them training. So if somebody is maybe new to the gym, you might not necessarily want to crush them day one to the point where they're not walking for forever and they can't come back to the gym for a really long time because they are detrained. So picking shortened overloaded movements was going to let them get a really decent workout in, have a little bit less stress, a little bit less of a stimulus, or a little bit less of a fatigue cost associated with that stimulus, which in that case is totally fine. And then it's going to let them build the habit of getting into the gym. It's going to let them get more work done over time, and that's going to be great. So I'm actually going to try to do this last set here, after talking with Mom for a second. So there's a lot of benefits still to short and overloaded movements as opposed to length and overloaded movements. You just need to know why and have it in your program for a reason. And like I said, just because it's a short and overloaded movement doesn't mean I still can't get a good training effect from it by picking a different way to increase the intensity of the stimulus. So I was still using the principle progressive overload over time, like the way that I was progressing the stimulus was trying to do the same amount of work in less and less sets. So that's going to increase the demand, my hamstring's ability to produce energy or metabolic demand. Can I keep doing reps for longer so I can get that work done in less sets? And what that does is, since I kind of use a step-by-step means of progression, is that I'm eventually going to progress that to a program where I'm going to do lengthened overloaded movements. But that means my hamstrings are going to be in a really good position to actually handle that and not have those very intense exercises overload my hamstrings and maybe overtrain me. So kind of like thinking a couple programs out. I'm thinking a couple programs ahead. Okay, when I get to Nordics and like heavily loaded GHRs and all that stuff, how am I going to be able to get the most out of them? Well, if I do a couple like step-by-step progressions to actually get up there, I'm going to get more out of them by the time that I'm there. To think about your exercise selection or your exercise choice weeks or maybe programs out in advance, but you will get more out of it if you can start to think more out of your program, if you can start to think about that a little bit. Like, how do you cycle through the most intense stimulus throughout the year so that you're not using it all the time? Because if you're using it all the time, you're going to become desensitized to it. But if you want to make sure that you're prepared for it the couple programs before, so that you can actually get the most out of that stimulus when you're there. So I'm on my finisher now. I was going to do 50 back extensions and try to do the mammoth band, but as I kind of mentioned before, I was dealing with a little bit of a cold this today, and I tried 1 rep of the mammoth band, and I was like, no heckin' way. I really hate when that happens, and I try to normally not do that, but because I don't want to feel like a bitch, I don't want to feel soft, but some days I have to be a little bit forgiving of myself and realize, you know, if I'm fighting through a little bit of a cold, it's not me. Like, just let it happen, and then you can get back to your normal pushing hard when you're feeling better. It's okay. It's no problem. So I'll do a couple here with the band, and then honestly, even after that, I didn't have a lot left in the tank, so I just did the rest of my back extensions without any band, which, again, that kind of messes with my head mentally because I'm supposed to be on week 3, and I'm trying to use that principle, progressive overload, but you know what? Sometimes it just doesn't happen, and you need to be able to make those lateralizations and, you know, change things just a little bit wherever you need to still get a good training effect. So I was happy that I got these back extensions done with whatever my capabilities were for the day, so that I'm not going to continuously dig too much of just more and more and more of a hole that I can't necessarily pull myself out of in the future. So a lot of times when I'm picking accessory movements, just kind of maybe as one last point here, is I really think about more hitting movements as opposed to muscle, just because I am coming at that from more of a strength athlete's perspective. So you saw me do like my big supplemental movements like after the primary exercise, which was the RDL. Then my accessory movements are more the core movement, the carries, a knee flexion exercise, which you saw the slider hamstring curls, and then a hip extension exercise, which you see me doing the back extensions here. So I'm coming down to the end. I'm fatigued. I hate everything. I don't want to do anything more. I'm upset, and that means it was an okay workout. See you later.